Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. My name is Vadim Perlovsky, and today I'm excited to welcome one of the best-selling single malt scotches in the world. One of the brands that, for most people, is how they got into scotch. I mean, this was entry point for me. The Glenlivet 12 is such a classic space hider. And I guess I gave it away. We are tasting the Glenlivet today. The quintessential space cider malt, really, for a lot of people. We're excited to have Owen Gallagher joining us. He is the national brand ambassador for the Glenlivet. Welcome to the brand. Thank you. As Owen was saying earlier, he moved to the US from Scotland for this. So about 6 months, 7 months ago. So we're excited to have him. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Anyone who's here for the first time, welcome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are here to ask questions and get nerdy, so please don't hold back. Feel free to use the chat and unmute yourself and participate in the conversation. This is not a one-way Instagram live or what have you. You're not watching TV. You're here. Think of this as, an in-person presentation just over Zoom. So we're here to get nerdy and ask questions and participate. All that said, Owen, thank you so much for being here with us. We have six expressions in front of us. Some of us even have seven. I don't expect you to talk about the independently bottled add-on I throw in last minute. But we have six in our official lineup. I'm assuming we're going to go in age order. Are we going to go in reverse? What do you
So
think?
we'll do age order, and then the fusion cask lands in between 15 and 18.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, so we're for those of you at home, we're tasting the 12, the 14, the 15, the fusion cask, and then 18 and 21. So quite an excellent lineup, if I do say so myself. I worked for Glenlivet for 2 years, and I didn't get to taste the 21 year until well into my tenure there. So that's quite a treat for everyone here. I'm excited to share that with you guys, and thank you, Owen, for making this possible for us. So we're excited. I think I've rambled enough. All of the people here have heard me talk for way too much, so we're going to pass it over to you and let you take it. Yeah, Jane's showcasing the Quake that we're going to give away at the end. Or anyone can see that. Let me showcase this 1 second. How do I do this? I'm going to pin for everyone. Boom. Ooh. And we'll have Owen explain what a Quake is. That's always a fun conversation. But yeah, all
I'd
that said,
only,
Owen, please take it away. The floor is yours.
I'd only recently discovered those quakes. They're from a few years ago, and I managed to find a box of them in Chicago. So I've just came into possession of them myself. Yeah, as Vadim said, my name is Owen. I'm the national brand ambassador for the Glenlivet. I've been here for 6 months, but I've worked with the Glenlivet for about 2.5 years. Previously, I worked in Scotland as part of the global team, actually as at the distillery itself, which you can see in the picture that I've got behind me here. And I was just working with the global team every week, bringing people from all around the world who sell Glenlivet, who are fans of Glenlivet, taking them to the Glenlivet distillery. And we also own 13 other single malts under our company as well. Some of these being Aberlour, Scapa, Longmorn, and then we have big blends like Chivas Regal, Ballantine's, and Royal Salute as well. So that's what I was doing in the last couple of years. Previous to that, I'm not sure. As you are all very knowledgeable about whiskey, this is probably one of the rooms that people will actually recognise the name. But previous to that, I was a distiller at Glengoyne Distillery, which is just north of Glasgow, which was my hometown. So I ran the distillation operation there for about 2 years, and that's where I got my start. I actually studied acting and performance. Wanted to find a way of using that. Became a tour guide for Glengoyne and worked my way up from there. Now I've got a presentation, so I'm going to see if I can share my screen.
You should base yourself in LA if you prefer dry climate and a little bit of acting. Base
Oh
yourself in
yeah,
LA.
that's the place to be. I've been out to LA two or three times now.
We have
But
a little
yeah,
thing called Hollywood in LA. I don't know if you heard of it. Actors kind of seem to like it.
yeah, no, I think I must be a niche, one of these niche film networks.
They've made
uh,
one or two, I think. It's usually indie stuff.
Yeah, it's all
Yeah.
small scale and craft. Uh, as we go through, I can quite often get carried away and fall into rabbit holes of talking about whiskey. When that happens, my accent will involuntarily get thicker. I forgot to bring subtitle cards, but as we go through these six whiskies that we're going to try today, each whiskey, my accent gets easier and easier to understand, and people start sounding more and more like me as we go through the whiskey. So I thought before jumping into any of the brand, as Vadim said, some people are looking thirsty on the call. I think we'll just start straight off the bat with this entry level this gateway whiskey into the single malt category. As Vadim said as well, it's the like quintessential Speyside single malt. I will get into the reasoning behind that and why it's such a big name in a little bit once I talk about the brand history. But if you have the samples in front of you, I don't know if you've got them pre-poured. If you still need to pour them just now, please feel free to do that. I'm going to pour myself one here. So you'll all have your own way of drinking whiskey. I'm sure everybody has their own techniques. We have someone in Scotland. His name is Sandy Islop, and he is the master blender for all of our single malts and all of our blended Scotch portfolio as well. He's been the master blender at Chivas Brothers Limited for over 20 years. And the biggest single malt that we produce, of course, is the Glenlivet 12. We produce a vat of Glenlivet 12, about 27,500 litres twice a week, every single week. So it's always in production, it's always being made, and it's the number one single malt across the globe in terms of sheer volume. So we are very, very proud of it. It's the oldest recipe that we have in our portfolio. The original blend of this was made in 1963, and it was made actually to break into the US market. So previous to this, most distilleries were using Oroloso sherry, ex Oroloso sherry casks, or even a lot of virgin oak casks prior to the 1960s. We were the Glenlivet was the first distillery to realise after Prohibition there was this brand new emerging industry in the form of bourbon that was growing in the US. Everybody had entered the US on a similar playing field, and we decided that we were going to start bringing these bourbon barrels from the new US market back to Scotland and maturing our whiskey in it. So that's the Glenlivet 12 is about 85% ex bourbon barrels. Some of them have went round several times with Glenlivet whiskey in them before, and the last 15% is still that traditional Oroloso sherry cask. It's quite difficult to pick up on in this expression, the Oroloso sherry, but it has quite small, subtle aromas to it that I tend to find once you've swallowed the whiskey and you're experiencing the finish, you get this kind of dry cinnamon, nutmeg, warm spice at the back of the palate, which is the influence of that 15% Oroloso sherry. But the first thing I would ask you to do is with the glass, which I now realise is actually disappearing into my background. But if you hold the glass at a quite a steep angle, you can hold if you rotate the glass around and you do a complete rotation. Once you let the whiskey settle, you will see a thick line that appears on the side of the glass. This is called the beading line. That oil that's sticking to the glass is naturally found from the oak wood of the cask. European oak, Quercus robur, gives more oil, so Oroloso sherry matured whiskies have a thicker, more prominent line. Ex bourbon barrels still give oil, but a little bit less coming through from them. The thicker and more prominent that line is, it's responsible for about 85% of any whiskey's flavour, and it's over 100% responsible for that finish and the viscosity and the texture of the whiskey as well. So it's a rough way of working out the smell of the whiskey, how strong and powerful the flavour of the whiskey is going to be before you even take a sip. And then of course you're also taking a look at the colour at the same time. So I'm going to ask you to smell the whiskey. When I do this, as I mentioned, everyone has their own technique. One technique that, well, I'll go over three actually, that our master blender uses. First one is if you take a smell from the top of the glass at 12 o'clock, and then if you take a smell from the bottom of the glass at 6 o'clock, you'll actually pick out two completely different flavors. The reason there's so many ways of smelling smelling whiskey is because the alcohol vapor is heavier than air, so it lingers around inside the glass. If you go right in and take a big smell of that whiskey, you're going to pick up on that 40% ABV smell right away. To counter that, the second technique is to actually blow into the glass. It disperses all that heavier alcohol vapor. If you blow into the glass and then go in for a smell, you'll get more from that oil, from the oak wood. This is 85% bourbon, so it's light, it's citrusy, it's green apples, pears, lemon zest, quite a light floral, tropical notes on the nose. Now, my personal favourite technique for smelling the whiskey is if you hold it really far down on your chest, way further down than you would normally hold a glass, and then bring it up slowly to where you just begin to pick up on the smell. Because of that alcohol vapor being heavier than air, you can smell the oil from the oak wood before you actually start picking up that smell of the alcohol. And if you're able to find that area, continue to breathe in through your nose, but open up your mouth and it connects your nose and mouth together through the soft palate at the back, hopefully allowing you to pick up on some extra flavors, smells, and aromas. But it's not recommended that you look at anybody while you're doing that because you don't look massively smart, but hopefully it allows you to pick up on some extra flavors and smells. So that's us looked at the whiskey and we've smelled the whiskey. The last thing I would ask you to do is it comes back to the oil, is that you swirl the glass around, move the whiskey around inside the glass, and then if you hold it up to your ear, you'll there's a few people in the call. I had to try to do a quick scroll through there. The rule that we use there, of course, is if you can hear the bagpipes, it's your sign to stop. That's that's our. Of course, the next thing is to taste the whiskey itself. When it comes to drinking whiskey, I would always recommend taking the smallest sip that you possibly can on your first drink. You actually should be taking in such a small amount that you won't even need to swallow the whiskey, and your body, the heat from your body will evaporate the alcohol, and you'll be left just with that oil coating the mouth. Doing this allows your taste buds to get more used to that stronger flavour, the ABV of the alcohol, and allows your taste buds to kind of hone in on the flavours that are left behind by that oil because you're allowing your taste buds time to just to sit with that oil still on the palate. So as I mentioned, this is 85% ex-bourbon barrel. So it's very light. It's very fruity. It's got, as you can see here, floral notes, sweet fruits. We're talking lemon zest, pineapples. You're getting peaches coming through. You are getting that vanilla, that kind of creamy, buttery texture that comes from the ex-bourbon barrels that's coming through as well. And the interesting thing about the Glenlivet is when we actually distill the spirit and it's totally clear, the stills that we use that you can see behind me once again in this picture, they're about 8 meters tall. So they only allow the lightest, fruitiest vapor to travel over the top. And by the time we've done our double distillation, we have 150, it's 150 proof. But if you sprayed it onto the back of your hand, it would smell of lemon, pineapple, and lemon zest. You're getting very light tropical fruits, extremely high ABV. So using this American oak barrel, which gives us the green apples, the coconut, the lemon zest, these kind of light, refreshing tropical flavors, it highlights the base spirit, which is already pulling forward these light, refreshing tropical notes as well. As I mentioned, you're not getting much spice. You can see from the flavour wheel here on the bottom right of the screen, there is a little bit of spice coming through, and that's mainly responsible down to that 15% Oloroso sherry that's coming through with that kind of warm spice. Does anyone have any questions on the Glenlivet 12? As I mentioned, it's the #1 single malt in the world. It's been around since 1963. All made from, of course, single malt, all made at the Glenlivet distillery. And it was the first single malt whiskey from Scotland to use a main majority of ex-bourbon. Today, the industry is about 85% using ex-bourbon barrels. And then, of course, with the decline of the Oloroso sherry industry, a lot of their casks are now actually made specifically with the intention of then selling to the Scotch whisky industry in the future. So it's a very small percentage of this. As we go through the tasting, we're going to kind of slowly up that Oloroso sherry influence that we have in each one of our expressions.
Thank you, Owen. Also, on the history of the Glenlivet, and correct me if I'm wrong, I remember uh, a very interesting thing for us in America. The Glenlivet was the first distillery to go legit in Scotland, and then they won a like a trademark case of some sort. Is that right?
Yeah, so we were 1824. We were one of only two distilleries to be founded in that year. 200 or 200 anniversary was last year, and then yeah, for a long time, a lot of other whiskies were using the name Glenlivet. So pretty much the idea of it being called Scotch or being called single malt or being called whiskey wasn't the case, and it's kind of like I guess like Hoover and vacuum cleaner. It became like one and the same. The brand of the Glenlivet became the name of the categories. People would actually ask for West Coast peaty, smoky Glenlivets, and people would ask for it just became the name of Scotch whisky. And yeah, that had to be taken to court. It was an 8 year long court case. And that's why you'll see on our bottle that it's the Glenlivet, with almost every other brand that you see is just Glenmorangie, Glenfiddich, Glengoyne. They don't have the in front of it, and it's because we were not allowed to get the name of the geographical location, which of course those laws have changed now. But we were the original distillery within the valley of the River Livet, and that's why we have that's what we had to go to court to fight and gain that name. And then there's an indenture which is still present at the Glenlivet distillery today from 1884. And it has all of the distillery managers from across Scotland back in the day who actually signed off on the fact that they would no longer use the name Glenlivet on their bottles. So there's many historic distilleries, like Aberlour being a perfect example, that if you go to the distillery in the stonework, you can actually still see it carved in. It says Aberlour Glenlivet. Is it Longmorn has Longmorn Glenlivet carved into the old buildings, because back in the day that's what everyone was producing. They were just producing this Glenlivet product instead of it being single malt or Scotch or blended Scotch. So it was a big shift. The Glenlivet was a cause of a big shift in the Scotch whisky industry, which was, I guess, sort of a double-edged sword for them when people started using the name for their other brands. But it was, yeah, kind of the whiskey that opened the gates for a lot of other distilleries to be able to legally buy their license, and then the Scotch whisky industry grew into what it is today. From 1824 to about 1860, almost every historic distillery that you see today was founded in that area in that time period. It was the biggest boom of single malt distilleries that we've ever had as an industry. So you'll probably all be aware of this, but there are a couple of rules that we have to follow. First one is very, very simple. It has to be distilled within Scotland, and it's from three ingredients, which is malted barley, water, and yeast. The only other thing that we can actually add legally within the industry, and the Glenlivet doesn't do this, but you can add caramel colouring to the bottles as well. The way that we're able not to do this within the Glenlivet is near the distillery. We have a warehousing site that stores 4.6 million barrels of Glenlivet whiskey. That's 4.6 million completely unique whiskies. They're all maturing at their own rate. They're all maturing differently, pulling different flavour profiles. Some of these whiskies actually don't develop much flavour at all, but they do develop a lot of colour. And we mark them out by painting the barrels red. And whenever we make a batch of Glenlivet 12 or any of our expressions, we save these red barrels to, if we need to add colour to the bottle, we can use these whiskies that haven't developed much flavour, but they have got a deep, rich colour. And we use that to kind of align all of our expressions so that they always smell and they always look the same colour. Of course, as they matured in oakwood casks in Scotland for at least 3 years and 1 day, in case of leap years, with a maximum size of it being 700 litres. That's usually either a sherry butt or a port pipe cask that's going to be of that scale at 700 litres. The American oak bourbon barrels are about 190 litres, and that's what a barrel is. And then we bring the barrels to Scotland, and for every 10 barrels that we have, we sacrifice one, break it down, and divide that wood among the other 9, making it a 250 litre cask, which we call a hogshead, which is the traditional Scottish casks. And then finally, just like champagne, single malt has to be bottled in Scotland, but blended Scotch, blended malt, all other types of Scotch whisky can actually be bottled anywhere else in the world. But strictly single malt has to be bottled within Scotland itself to be legally classed as a single malt whisky. There are five different types of whiskey, as I just mentioned a few of them there. Single malt is the one you're probably most aware of. It's from one single distillery made using purely malted barley. Blended malt is when several distilleries come together and blend their single malt spirit to produce a flavour that no one distillery can produce. The example that I have here is Monkey's Shoulder. You'll see on the Monkey's Shoulder bottle that they have the 3 monkeys on it, and it's because there's 3 single malt distilleries in that blend that they keep quite a closely guarded secret. And then we've got arguably probably the rarest of the types of Scotch whisky that we're making, which is single grain and blended grain. As a company, we own a distillery called Strathclyde that produces 37.5 million litres of spirit every single year, but they don't need to use malted barley. They'll use a small percentage for the enzymes that's inside the grain, but we can use wheat and corn and any grain that we want to produce this very, very light, laid back, floral, sweet whiskey, which we use as the canvas pretty much that we use in Chivas Regal and Ballantine's. And from that canvas of our single grain whiskey, we then build the flavour profile using different single malts. Blended grain today in Scotland is 146 single malt distilleries. There's only 8 blended grain distilleries, and it's very rare for these large companies that own these places to work together and make a blended grain. So that's probably the rarest of the 5 that we have here. And then the least rare is blended Scotch. Blended Scotch makes up 85 to 90% of the entire Scotch whisky industry globally. It's in our portfolio, it's Chivas Regal, Ballantine's, Royal Salute. Outside of that, of course, you have the biggest Scotch whisky, which is Johnnie Walker, which is a blended Scotch, of course. So that is a mix of both the grain whisky and the single malt, and that's the biggest type of Scotch whisky within the category. So as you'll know, there's 5 different regions in Scotland: the Highlands, the Lowlands, Speyside, Campbeltown, and the Isle of Islay. These can be broken down into flavours for the most part, but the history behind it is that the Lowlands used to be the only area of Scotland that you could legally distill whisky in. The Highlands was completely illegal. The Glenlivet, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is a big player in why the Highlands opened up and distillation started being allowed within the Highlands. And when that happened, they started noticing sort of patterns emerging from around this huge area where there were certain flavours coming through. Of course, Islay being your peaty, smoky whiskies, because Scotland has been on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean for millions of years. The wind blows in from the Atlantic, it pushes the shrubs and plants under the mud. Over thousands of years, they condense down into what we call peat. And in Scotland, peat has been used to heat houses and cook food for hundreds and hundreds of years. So when they started drying out their barley grain at the start of the process, it made sense for them to use peat there. And that's why we get the smokier flavours coming through. Campbeltown, this peninsula on the west coast, if you need to break it into a flavour profile, it would be that sort of seaside salty note that's coming through. but it actually became a region by itself because once upon a time it was the most highly dense area of distilleries in the world because it was such a pain for the authorities to, if you can see where my mouse is on the screen, this is where Glasgow is located down here on the map. And then on the opposite side on the lowland boundary, you have Edinburgh. That's where all of the authorities would have been travelling so far north into the Scottish Highlands or down round that peninsula into Campbelltown was an extremely tedious task that the authorities simply weren't doing. They weren't really regulating these areas. So after 1824 and the purchasing of the Glenlivet's license up till that 1860 point, by 1860 the town of Campbelltown had 500 residents and it had 35 legal whiskey distilleries that were founded in it during that time. Of course, not a very successful way to run a business, so only two of them still remain today. That's Springbank and Glen Scotia, but that's why it became its own region, despite it having very, very few distilleries in it. And then Speyside is the most highly dense area of distilleries in the world today. It's 40 miles squared with 52 distilleries. It has Aberlour, it has Glenlivet, of course, it has Glenfiddich, it has Balvenie. It has all of these amazing whiskies that you hear about all across the industry and all over the world are all nestled into that Speyside region. It is sort of the antithesis to Islay. You don't get many smoky whiskies. We define it by being the three F's of Speyside, which is fresh, floral, and fruity. And you'll find many, many variations, but they all follow that sort of basic premise. As I said, Glenlivet's like pineapple and lemon zest. Aberlour is like fig and dried fruits. They're both in that fresh, floral, and fruity flavour profile, but two very, very completely different whiskies. And that's just breaking down what I said there. So, before we move on to the Glenlivet 14, is there any questions on anything I just covered there? No, perfect. Okay, so the
Oh,
Glenlivet
you
14.
I noticed that the islands aren't in a region. Is that at all being addressed?
So you'll find that the island quite often will call themselves after the exact island that they're on. So, for instance, one of our single malts is Scapa, and Scapa is located right on this like most northern island in Scotland, which is called the Orcadian Archipelago. And Scapa would class itself as an Orcadian single malt. But the Scotch Whisky, the Scotch Whisky Association, who kind of makes all the laws that we have to follow when making Scotch whisky, don't recognise the islands as an independent region, and they fall under the Highland area. But very, very rarely will you find one of these island whiskies calling themselves a Highland single malt. They'll call themselves an Arran single malt, a Raasay, a Skye, an Orcadian. They kind of go off of the name of the island themselves. But legally, from the Scotch Whisky Association's point of view, the islands themselves would be classed as a Highland. A
Oh
Highland.
wow. So Aaron at the very bottom and Scapa at the very top are all part of the Highlands.
Yeah, so this is why it's really difficult to like break the Highlands down into a flavor category because you've got north and south, and then you've got like the smoky whiskies. Even if you're not on Islay, like up here, you've got Skye, which is home of Talisker. It has that kind of peaty flavor to it.
Yeah.
Well, on the east coast, outside the Speyside on the east, you have a couple of distilleries there, which are very Speyside like in their flavor with the fresh floral and fruity flavor profile, but no peat whatsoever. So it's such a huge region that it almost encompasses all of the flavors of different single malts, particularly when you start going up into these tiny islands where the air around the casks actually impacts the flavor, and you do start getting almost that Campbelltown salinity coming in the whiskey as well, with that like seaside salty flavor as well. So the Highlands and Lowlands are purely a historical boundary between illegal and legal distillation, but it's very difficult to break them down into flavor profiles.
That makes sense. You mentioned you worked as a distiller at a distillery that is well known for being right on the borderline of lowlands and highlands, right?
Yeah, so Glengoyne, this actual border is it's a road that crosses right through the middle of Scotland. Glengoyne Stillhouse sits on the north side of the road, and all of their warehouses sits on the south side of the road. So they are a Highland distillery because their stills are 4.6 meters into the Highlands, but all of their whiskies then matured in the lowlands, which is quite a unique thing for a whiskey for a distillery in any area to cross the border, because actually other than Isla and that road, the borders are all quite loose and flexible and they move around. Like some people would only count Campbelltown at the very, very bottom of that peninsula, while others count that whole strip of land down the west as Campbelltown. And then almost any map that you look at that has Speyside on it, the board is a different shape, and it's sometimes some distilleries fall into it. Sometimes, like Dalwhinnie, for instance, is a distillery that's typically just outside of Speyside, but on some maps you'll find that Dalwhinnie falls under into the Speyside region as well. So there's a kind of there's not an exact border for a lot of these regions. So for a distillery to be right on one of those only solid tangible borders is a very unique selling point. I've not spoke about that fact in many years. So that was yeah, but
And using the name, whether the distillery is in Speyside or Highland, that's up
yeah,
to the distillery, right? Like they don't have, because we know there's quite a few distilleries in Speyside that are dead center Speyside that choose to call themselves a Highland whiskey.
yes. So it's the regions are made by the Scotch Whisky Association, but you can be quite flexible with how you make it. Like a lot of the Singleton distilleries, two out of the three of the Singleton distilleries are in Speyside, and one of them is in the Highlands, and they will always class themselves as a Highland single malt, even if the bottle you've got was distilled in the Speyside region. And there's many other examples of brands that do that. As I mentioned, there's 52 distilleries in that small region. So I think it's sort of a way of differentiating. There's definitely more success from the Speyside distilleries. You've got huge names like Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, and Macallan. They're all in that area. And I think people use the word Highlands because there are so many Speyside ones that kind of differentiates them from the crowd. Okay, so we've got Glenlivet 14. Glenlivet 14 is actually a brand new whiskey for me. I used to work at the distillery itself, but this whiskey is exclusively made for the US market. You can't buy it anywhere else in the world. I wasn't ever able to get my hands on it at the distillery itself. So only when I moved here to the US 7 months ago, it was the first time I actually tried this. Globally, it is the only whiskey that we produce that has a cognac finish to it, which completely changes the flavour of the whiskey itself. You'll find as we go through the Glenlivet portfolio, we really kind of stick to this tropical, light, refreshing, fruity flavour we find in Southeast Asia. Glenlivet does very well because of this light, refreshing flavour. It goes into like highballs with soda and lemon juice, and people are making like light, refreshing cocktails using the Glenlivet because it is this that already holds this kind of tropical, refreshing flavour profile. The Glenlivet 14 uses more sherry than the 12 did. We're probably looking at about 30 to 35% sherry. The rest is bourbon. We say we have 100 casks, 35 of them are sherry, the rest are bourbon. They completely mature separately for 14 years, all 100 of them. We then bring those 100 together and we leave it for about 6 months in a large metal vat at the bottling hall, and that's to allow all of those oils that you see on the glass to kind of compete against each other. They balance out, they blend, they mix. We leave it for 6 months before we do anything else. This is a selective finish, so roughly about a third of what's going into this that's going into this bottle. We take a third of it and we put it into the cognac cask. What's interesting about the cognac cask though is adds almost a thicker texture to the whiskey. It gains more viscosity, but it takes those light, refreshing lemon zest, pineapple flavor notes, and it turns it almost into dessert fruits. We're getting poached pears and grilled peaches. You get kind of light, bitter, chocolatey note that's coming through. And as I mentioned, I don't have a scientific reason for it. But when you drink this whiskey compared to even the 15, which we'll try next, or the 12, this one just gains a greater viscosity and it has a thicker, smoother texture to the liquid itself, which is in part to down to the cognac barrel. But I'm not 100% sure whether or not it's the cognac that was in the cask before that's giving that texture to the whiskey, or it's a characteristic of just the wood itself that's bringing through that thicker, more oilier texture. So, yeah, as you can see here, once again, we're getting, like, if you look at the flavor note, we're still pulling in that fruity flavor. We're drawn way back on the floral notes that we had on the 12, and we're really pulling in that sweet. So, as I meant, that sweeter flavor, the toffee notes that are coming through, this kind of rich, chocolatey, bitter flavor that's coming through as well. And you can see some of the things that I said there. You've got poached pears as an example, but we've got mandarins and syrup, chocolate coated raisins. It's all very, very dessert focused flavors that are coming through. Now I see there's a few. I saw there was a few messages that came through in the chat. Is that questions that are coming through? Are we?
It's just mostly people saying how much they like this.
Yeah. Well, it very very quickly became one of my favourites in the portfolio. Completely different to the rest. Every other whiskey that we're going to try today, I was able to get in Scotland. I'd tried for a long time. I'm extremely familiar with this portfolio, but then this being a brand new whiskey for me, it's very quickly became a favourite. One that you can definitely drink neat. Even people who aren't big whiskey drinkers, when they try this, that thicker, more viscous texture really helps create a smoother, lighter note. And there's the thicker texture, of course, is coming from more oil from the oak wood casks. The more oil that's present, the greater the divide is between your taste buds and the alcohol. And that's again comes down to that line on the glass. It's not just a layer of oil across the top. It's like a bubble that encapsulates the whole whiskey inside that glass, a bubble of oil that surrounds it. This is why people would recommend adding a drop of water in, which we would call an angel's teardrop, because it breaks down that layer of oil. The amino acids start reacting quicker and it heightens all of the flavour of the whiskey as well. So it's an excellent whiskey to, if you have any friends who aren't big whiskey drinkers but they're looking to get into it. The Glenlivet 14 is a fantastic sort of entry whiskey for that reason. But I've actually put the next two whiskies side by side in this because on paper you would assume that the Glenlivet 14 and the Glenlivet 15 would taste very, very similar. They're only 1 year apart on age, which is the obvious kind of similarity between them. But the Glenlivet 15 is finished in a virgin French oak cask. It's never held any wine in it. It's never held any spirit in it before. Our whiskey is the first thing to ever enter the cask. It comes from Lemezan, which is right in the heart of France. It has no sea borders. It's completely surrounded by land, and not frequently used within the cognac industry, admittedly. But the oak is very, very often used in French white wines. So you would think this is a Glenlivet 14, a Glenlivet 15. They're both using some sort of variation of French oak on this finish. So yeah, on paper it could sound like they would taste really, really similar side by side. But if you have both the samples in front of you just now, I would urge you to take them both and smell the 14 side by side with the 15, and you find it a completely different. The Glenlivet 14, as I mentioned, really, really dessert forward, really sweet, chocolatey. You've got that poached pear flavour coming through. The Glenlivet 15 is right back in with that kind of refreshing tropical fruit notes that are coming through. But we're not going as tropical as we did with the 12. We're talking more uh, orchard fruits, we're green apples, we're pears, we're kind of this kind of really quite crisp flavors that are coming through. It has a very, very unique finish if you come to sip the whiskey. It's a very unique finish that I've not found in not only our whiskies, but across the entire Scotch whisky category that I've never found in any other whiskey, which is similar. Once again, this wood is used in French white wine. When you take a sip of the 15, you swallow it. The 14, that oil would linger around in your mouth for minutes afterwards. If you don't eat or drink anything after the 14, you will still taste that finish lasts forever. The 15 takes maybe 15, 20 seconds and then it completely evaporates and dissipates away. And this dry, light finish, which is coming from that French oak cask as well. Now, I mentioned Glenlivet 12, very light tropical notes. It's used in highballs across the world. People are using it for these light, refreshing cocktails. The best whiskey cocktail that I have ever had was a Glenlivet 15, but a French 75, but then switch out the gin for Glenlivet 15. So you've got lemon juice, simple syrup, Glenlivet 15, topped up with champagne. But the Scotch marketing team here in the US think 15's too old to go into a cocktail, and the champagne marketing team never want anything to be mixed with their liquid. So I've been told to stop recommending that. So you'll need to make that one on your own time.
That
So
seems silly. Whatever draws depletions at this point. If
yeah,
it's a good cocktail, it's a good cocktail.
I absolutely agree with that. If we can push the two of our products into the one cocktail, I think that's an absolute win.
Yep.
So as you can see on the flavor, that spice this time has went right the way up. We're actually not using as much sherry as we did in the 14. So that spice is purely coming from the fact that this whiskey is the first thing to ever enter that French oak cask. So the French oak cask still has all of the tannins intact. There's been no wine, no spirit that's like pulled any of that rich, spicy, dry oakiness out of the wood to smooth over the flavor. We're still getting all of that dry, oaky, spicy flavour that's coming through. As I mentioned, that also comes into that dissipation of the finish at the end. But round that flavour wheel, you're getting a lot of flavours. You're getting raisin, you're getting the toffee, you're getting the vanilla, you're getting the fruit. It's a very well-rounded whiskey, which I personally have as probably my top five whiskies of all time. And a big part of that is because of how unique I find it being against every other whiskey in the category. That virgin French oak finish just adds something that if you are a seasoned whiskey drinker, it's something that if you haven't tried the Glenlivet 15 before, it's definitely kind of an innovation, a change into the category. The reason for that being, though, is previous to 1915, legally we didn't have to mature whiskey inside a cask. We could still sell Scotch whiskey until 1915 as a clear spirit that looked like vodka or gin, and people would throw spices and berries into that and make a very, very early form of punch. In 1915 is when we legally started having to mature for 3 years and one day in an oak wood barrel, and that, of course, changed the entire industry. Then in the 1980s, there was a really subtle change to the law, which allowed us to now move whiskey from one barrel to another without impacting the maturation. And that's when finishing became a thing. But we will be the first to admit at Glenlivet, we were super late in even recognising this change had happened. Other brands, the biggest one, of course, being Balvenie, who are big pushers towards the idea of finishing whiskey, were way ahead of us on this. So when we first came out, this was the first whiskey that we ever produced with a finish. When we first came out, other distilleries had been using rum and cognac, and that had been done before, but nobody had ever used a virgin French oak cask. So we wanted our first entry into the new world of this finishing single malt Scotch whiskies to be something that no one had ever done before. Hence why it's such a unique bottling with a unique finish.
Jane asked a
Use
good
the,
question. Go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to ask, I put it in the chat, but just in case you missed it. Do you use the Limousin barrels for something else after you've done the 15?
So we do not, unfortunately. So the casks would be used for the Glenlivet 15, and then they've been seasoned with the whiskey at that point. So unfortunately, maybe in the future we will use it. But what we do is we cut them in half and we send it to the local garden centre, and they sell that as plant pots there. Or if there's any golf fans in the chat, one of the holes at St Andrews golf course, the hill and the golf course is completely man-made because it's a bunch of Glenlivet barrels that are under it, and then they covered it in soil and made a man-made hill in the middle of the golf course, which is all Glenlivet barrels as well. So there's many ways around it. That's an excellent question. I've never been asked that before. And of course, because it's a virgin cask, we could only use it one time. So yeah, it's an excellent question. I'm going to try and find that out. And if I'm able to get an answer to it, I'll send the answer to Vadim, and he'll be able to reach out to you with
Great.
the answer.
Yeah, I just wondered if it was maybe something that you would use in a different blend where it would be,
See that's what I was originally thinking. I was going through my head of the Chivas Regal portfolio if there's anything there that could use it, but I don't think, because then at that point it would be a Scotch Lemazan cask, which would actually be a more unique finish or a
It would
more
be a
unique
first
maturation
fill.
than
Yeah.
a first fill Glenlivet, like virgin French oak, we're not French oak cask would be, that would be an industry first for sure. So maybe they've got something in the pipeline,
seems
but
like somebody would want that.
yeah, absolutely, it'd be a very 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 unique. I'm going to find out what they do. So at the moment, because of the like this maybe I shouldn't say this, but because we were so late on the idea of finishing with with rum with cognac, and then we created this whiskey. Within that warehouse, 4.6 million barrels, we actually have casks of whiskey that are maturing that you couldn't legally call whiskey if we released today. But if the Scotch Whisky Association change the laws in the future, we have whiskies sitting there that aren't in oak wood, they're in pine wood casks, and we've got different things there. So maybe among those kind of innovations of us trying to stay ahead of the curve, we might actually still we might be using the French oak casks in there as well.
You know, when you said this was a virgin oak cask, I was expecting it to have a harsher oak flavor,
Yeah,
right? But
absolutely.
but I think the 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 oak gives it a delicateness.
Yeah, so it takes
Yeah,
it like it's surprising how well it highlights that light,
yeah,
refreshing, fruity note, and
yeah.
yeah, it's really, really, really light on the palate, and I think it's only on the finish. It's after you've
But
swallowed the whiskey that you get that sort of spicy oakiness that you
yeah.
would, yeah, certainly you would
But
certainly
but
expect.
it's not boring, right? So some is sometimes delicate means boring, right?
Yeah,
There's nothing there. But this has got, a backbone, but it's delicate. And again, I was really surprised. Now maybe as we go taste some more, maybe it's just that it's side by side with the 14. But
yeah.
anyway, this is
The
super
14
pleasant,
has more of the sherry cask in there
yeah,
as well, which creates that more robust, punchy flavour.
right.
But no, I think
But
you're
it but
absolutely right.
it was more oily too. It had that unctuousness to it that this one doesn't. But like I said, it's not boring.
Yeah,
Just has this amazing delicateness to it. Yeah, I
no,
like
yeah.
it.
That's why I always think trying them side by side is an interesting experience because, as I say, on paper they sound very very similar, but side by side they're completely different whiskies that are actually coming through. But no, it's a very good point, and you've hit the nail on the head with the comparison between them. That thick viscous viscosity of the Glenlivet 14 compared to that like dry, light finish of the Glenlivet 15. Two innovations, two brand. When we made them both, they were brand new for the Glenlivet category. We'd never worked with cognac barrels before. Glenlivet 15, we'd never even done a finish before we made that one. So they were both innovations in our category, and they show just how diverse a small change in the idea of seasoning the barrels, what's been in it before or lack of thereof, what's been in it before, can completely change the flavour of the whiskey itself.
Did you mention how long the finishing is for?
Glenlivet 14 is a 2-year finish. Glenlivet 15 is 18 months.
Okay.
So there's a slight difference in their finishing. But yeah, 18 months for the 15, 2 years for the 14.
And when you say 18 months for the 15, are you saying that it's in the original ex-bourbon cask for 13 and a half years, and then the finishing brings it to the 15 years? Or are you saying it goes 15 years in the first barrel and then the
15
finish will
years in
count?
the first barrel, and then it's like that's the end of maturation. We would have to move it on to something like I use a title like double maturation. If we then put it into the virgin French oak cask and left it in there for over 3 years, that would
Hmm.
then become a second maturation or a double maturation at that point. But because we're only doing the 18 months, the maturation like halts at the first 15 years. So
Okay.
yeah, for all of them, when we do a finish, the number on the bottle is how long it's spent. Usually, in doing a double oak maturation of ex bourbon and Oloroso sherry, and then we'll do that entire, or even older, of course, like in the 15, we can have 16 and 17-year-old whiskey in there legally. But then it's after that maturation that we move it into the cask. But that never adds onto the age statement. So technically, the 14 has actually spent 16 years in casks, but it was 14 in the original barrels.
Thank you.
So this is just a kind of rundown on, as I've already mentioned at a few points, the Glenlivet's history is intertwined with the overall Scotch whisky industry's history. And we'll start right at the beginning here in the 1820s and before, where if you cast your mind back to that map of Scotland, that whole Highland region was completely illegal to make any whisky. They It wasn't always illegal. They actually allowed the license to be bought in the Scottish Highlands. It was way more expensive than it was to buy in the Lowlands. And the Highland distillers decided that they weren't going to have any of that. And they decided that they would just do it illicitly and they would hide in the hills. It was such common practice, though, that the Glenlivet translates in Old Scottish Gaelic to the valley of the River Livet. And if you translate that slightly further, the word livet translates into smooth flowing one, which is the description of the river that flows down past the distillery itself. And of course, it could also be used as a description for the whiskey. But in the early 1800s, the valley had a nickname. And the nickname was the Valley of 200 Fires, because when the sun set at night, you could see 200 illicit stillmen in the forest, in the hills, hiding in their barns. On record, they found 119 illicit distillers in the Livet Valley alone. The valley to the east was exactly the same. The valley to the west was exactly the same. These people were churning out a clear spirit. They would sell it to their local smugglers. They would then take it down to Glasgow or Edinburgh. It would be bottled. It could be sold as a legal lowland single malt under a name, and then it would be sent to England or further afield out into Europe from there as well. But people were churning this spirit out as quickly as they can, try and make a quick bit of money. George Smith, our founder, who's actually this man here at the bottom of the screen, had a slightly different philosophy. He was only selling to the smugglers rather than like once or twice a week, like the smugglers or the distillers around him. He was only selling to the smugglers about once every 3 months because he was taking his time and trying to make a really smooth, palatable. He was trying to make his spirit the best spirit out of everybody around him. And he knows he was successful because the smugglers started discovering that they could actually charge 16 pence more per gallon of George Smith's Glenlivet spirit than they could for any other illicit distiller in that region. Then, to add even more credit to his success, 1822 is probably the most important year in the entire Scotch whisky history because, without getting too far into it, in 1822, Scotland and England weren't exactly on speaking terms due to past discretions, and no one from the royal family had came up to Scotland in over 200 years. King George IV came to Scotland. He went to Edinburgh. At this time, it was actually totally illegal for people in Scotland to wear tartan because it was associated with clans who rebelled against the throne. So the King George IV clad the entire city in tartan. He went to the 13 legal lowland distilleries. He tried all of their whiskey, and he decided he didn't like any of them. Down in Buckingham Palace in London, for many, many years, he'd been drinking one particular whiskey, which was his favourite, and in front of a room full of nobles, he demanded a dram of, I'm sure you can probably guess, the Glenlivet. He asked for a Glenlivet. It's still debated to whether or not to this day, whether or not the king knew it was completely illicitly distilled. But the Laird of Aberlour, who owns the land that the Livet Valley was in, was a friend. A laird is pretty much a lord is someone who owns the land. A laird is someone who manages the land for someone else. And this land that the Laird of Aberlour controlled was actually owned by the royal family. So the Laird of Aberlour was very close to the royal family, and we have record of letters from the Laird of Aberlour to Buckingham Palace where he's talking about somebody on his land that's producing this exceptional, what would then be called Ushkabaha, which is the water of life. And we have reason to believe the person he's referring to was actually the farm that George Smith was working on at the time, and he was illegally distilling the whiskey. So King George IV demands a dram of Glenlivet. When the king wants something, he gets it, so they very quickly have to change all the laws. And then in 1823, the new law came out. The new Excise Act was brought into the UK. It opened up Highland distillation. People could finally legally buy a license that wasn't significantly more expensive than the lowland distilleries. And from 1823 onwards, people start buying their license. It was extremely important, though, for George Smith to get his license early because he'd pretty much set a target on his back when the king sent people an envoy up to Speyside to try find this single malt. They knew roughly where he was making it, so he had to very quickly become a legal distillery, and he bought his license in 1824 for today's equivalent of about $15, and we still run off the same license to this day. Loads of the illicit distillers weren't happy about this because
Wait,
now a
wait.
lot.
Did you say $15 in that time's money or like the today equivalent of so like nothing? So he got the license for
Yeah, for like
nothing,
well back then it would have been far more expensive, but in today's money it would be about $15.
which is that's like cheaper than lunch in today's world. That's crazy.
And we still like from a legal standpoint, we're still running off that $15 license. Of course, on a yearly basis, we're paying more than $15 now, but like we're still on that original license at the Glenlivet.
Well done. Okay.
Uh, but yeah, that brought a whole new area of traffic to the Livet Valley. There were all these illicit distilleries still around George Smith's. Authorities were coming, taxmen were coming to the new Glenlivet distillery. So the Laird of Aberlour gifted George these two flintlock pistols that you can see behind his picture here for him to protect his distillery from local smugglers. Partly on record, he did fire them, but never at anybody. He used to fire it up the chimney of the distillery and it would echo across the valley to scare people off. And that's how he was defending his distillery back at the very early days in 1824. These are just a couple of small kind of bullet points across the coming years later. Charles Dickens, there's a quote from a letter that he wrote where he recommends the rare old Glenlivet to a friend. So he was an avid drinker of the Glenlivet spirit itself. 1884, as I mentioned earlier on, this is when all the other distilleries were using the Glenlivet name because the king had asked for the whiskey by name. It was pretty much the first ever celebrity endorsement ever done in any industry ever. So there was this aura of quality around the Glenlivet name. So people just started firing it on every single bottle of whiskey that they were making. And it was actually George Smith's son who was practicing law in Edinburgh when his father, George Smith, passed away. He gave the distillery to his son, and his son came up, saw all of these other Speyside distilleries popping up using the name Glenlivet. And to defend his father's legacy, he took it to court for 8 years. And as I mentioned, this indenture still hangs on the wall at the distillery, and as all of the distillery managers who had been previously using the Glenlivet name signed it, saying they would no longer use it. And we became the Glenlivet because we were the original distillery within the valley of the River Livet. Prohibition. This was, of course, a very impactful time for the Scotch whisky industry. The biggest market in the world had suddenly been removed from the game. But when it reopened, Captain Bill, or Captain William Henry Smith Grant, who's the great, great, great grandson of George Smith, was the distillery manager at that time. And he made a deal with Pullman's Train Companies, which is these fancy dinner carts, bar carts, glass ceiling trains. It's how everybody was getting around the US who was anybody. Everyone else was aiming at the resorts, the casinos, the hotels, all these kind of fancy establishments. The Captain Bill was the only one who targeted how people were moving around. And this bottle that you see on the bottom right of the screen is the Glenlivet 12-year-old, which in 1933, completely different blend to what we were making today, but this was the whiskey that was sold on all of their trains. From that point, Glenlivet grew and grew within the US market. It became the #1 single malt Scotch whisky within the US, and it's maintained that title right up until today. And then nothing happened for 91 years, and last year within that time, many things did happen. We created the blend of the Glenlivet 12. The laws changed, allowing finishes to come through. And I just had a message pop up on my screen saying my internet connection is unstable, but it's disappeared. Can you still hear me?
We got you back, yeah.
Yeah.
Right after you
Well,
said nothing happened for 90 years, I was like, what? And then you froze. It was perfect
oh,
timing.
okay. And well, so of course, something a lot did happen. This is a huge jump that we have in the timeline here. But of course, we created that original Glenlivet 12 blend in 1963. The laws on finishing also came around, and we started being able to use the cognac and the 15 and the experimentations through our distillation and maturation to create new flavors.
No, no.
Profiles and continually as the people who kind of opened up the Scotch whisky and they think you see. Hmm? Oh, did I
We
freeze
keep
again?
you going in and out, yeah, but we got you. Did you guys release a 200 anniversary bottling?
We did. We released the oldest Glenlivet that we've ever released, which was a Glenlivet 55-year-old, which was launched last year. I think it sells for around 45,000 a bottle. And there was, yeah,
You should have told me.
five.
Would have included it in the tasting. Would have been a nice
Yeah,
treat.
we could have brought that one in. I apologize.
All right.
Uh, but yeah, I think there were 100 of them made globally, and 15 of them were sent here to the US. So they are around. If you're ever in I think Four Seasons picked up a few of them. If you ever find one in a bar in there.
Fair enough.
And then, speaking of innovations and experimentation within the whiskey category, this is another US exclusive. This was one that I also couldn't try when I was at the Glenlivet distillery, and it was only when I moved here to the US that I tried this for the first time. This is a non-age statement. It's using whiskey from around 14 to about 18 years, but it does use some younger whiskey in that blend as well. The younger whiskies allow us to gain kind of crisp citrusy notes, which we lose the longer the whiskey spends inside the cask. And by not having an age statement, it allows our blending team to be far more uh, flexible on what whiskey they can use and what flavour profiles they can pull in. The fusion cask, though, is we actually break a rum barrel apart and a bourbon barrel apart. And for one cask, we'll have the cask ends, the tops, be bourbon and all the staves be rum. And then on the next one, the cask ends will be rum and all the staves will be bourbon. And that's what we that's what we finish the fusion cask in. This is an industry first. No other whiskey distillery has ever made a whiskey in this fashion by combining two different industries from elsewhere in the world, taking the flavours of that spirit that's been soaked into the oak wood of their own casks, and then fusing it into one singular cask. If anyone in the call has ever tried the Glenlivet Caribbean Reserve, you'll find, or many rum finishes from all across the industry, you'll find that rum very quickly can take over the palate of the whiskey, and it gets that kind of sharp sweetness, that cane sugar sweetness that comes through, and it can really, like, you can have a range of expressions from a brand, and they only have one rum finish. The rum finish one will be completely different to the rest because it has such a unique flavor that really takes over the flavor profile. By fusing the bourbon barrel and the rum barrel together here, we managed to kind of stay closer to the Glenlivet's traditional flavors of those lighter, more refreshing fruits. With this one, I get kind of chocolate covered bananas. It's even on the nose, you can smell banana that's coming through as well. But it's a kind of like a. I'm not a rum expert. From what people have told me who have tried this, they think it's very close to a Jamaican rum. Now, as the company, we actually own Havana Club in Malibu in Bumbu Rum. We worked with all of these rums to make our Glenlivet Caribbean Reserve and Fusion cask, and they decided that these rums were too overpowering in flavour. They took over too much of the flavour profile. So Sandy took one for the team, and he went out and travelled the Caribbean for 4 months and went to every rum distillery that he possibly could and tried every rum all across the Caribbean, and eventually found one that he believed worked well with the Glenlivet spirit. It's not one of ours, so he keeps it quite close to his chest of what it is. But what he actually done was he brought back 3 tanker trucks of the rum back to Scotland, and we season the casks in Scotland because in the Caribbean, their summers can last 8 months, 9 months long. In Scotland, our summers last like 8 days, 9 days long, so we don't get nearly as much evaporation. So from bringing those tankers back to Scotland, we can actually season far more casks over many more years. And we put the rum in, leave it for about 2 years, move it from one cask into the next, and we can continue that cycle over and over again. So we can continue to produce both the fusion cask and the Caribbean cask as well. So this is, as I say, industry first, completely different to any whiskey, US exclusive, so quite new to me. So I'd be quite interested just to open it up to people if people have any like flavour notes, any way that they would describe this whiskey. I'm always interested to hear how people describe this because it is quite a unique whiskey, well, for myself as well.
I'm pleasantly surprised by this. I remember having the Caribbean cask and being put off by that. It was too rummy and too kind of
Yeah,
childish. It was very sweet.
yeah,
Um,
there's a sharp sweetness to the Caribbean cask that like
yeah,
hits the palate immediately on the first sip. Well, I think this avoids that by that fusion of the bourbon and the rum.
absolutely. This has like a tropical note to it, but it's very enjoyable and very soft. I'm very impressed by this.
Yeah, I wouldn't know this was a rum cast if you hadn't have said that. I mean, it makes sense
Yeah,
when you say, "Oh, rum," but yeah, okay. But like Vadim, I've had your rum finish, and I same thing. It's too sweet, too rummy, you know.
yeah, they cut. So
Yeah.
it's like with this one, you're getting less of that cane sugar sweetness that you expect from a rum finish, and as both of you have stated, it's got more of that kind of tropical fruit note, which is what we're looking for within the Glenlivet's flavour profile itself. But the bourbon comes through still. You can get that. You do pick up on that kind of vanilla sweetness rather than the cane sugar sweetness that you get in other rum finishes. And I think a lot of the texture that comes through that sort of buttery, thicker texture is coming from the bourbon barrels as well.
I got a guava and papaya note off of it, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh,
Yeah, that
okay.
tropical, the creaminess, the vanilla and the cane sugar both.
Yeah,
It's a
fantastic. A
really
guava
interesting
and
blend. I
papaya.
wasn't sure I would like it, but it's really delicious.
Yeah, I find it to be maybe like the most palatable, like easy to drink sipping whiskey that I've came across. I think that combination of the rum and the bourbon work really well together. But papaya and guava is the first. I wouldn't even be familiar with those flavors on my own to be able to pull it out on a whiskey. So I'm going to try them
Yeah.
side by side and see if I can pick up on that myself.
Yeah, I mean, this is just masterful as far as blending goes. It's delicious.
And it's quite new to the market as well. It's only been I think it was launched about 2 years ago in the US, and as I mentioned, it's not available anywhere else. Working at the distillery, I wasn't able to get my hands on this. I knew it existed. I knew we had this like industry first, really unique bottling, and I was desperate to try it. So 2 days into landing in the US, I set out on a mission to go out and find this, and that was like the first whiskey I had since I came to the US was on a search to try find the fusion gas. So you can see, that's on the left. That's breaking down this idea of the cask finish. You can see on the box behind the bottle how it's displaying how those casks have actually been made, rather than it being what we would call a tiger cask, where it would be every second stave is rum and not every alternative one is bourbon. It's the cask ends that we're actually replacing, and then we're having all of the staves be either rum or bourbon, but we're using all parts of the cask because one will have the staves of the rum and one will have the staves of the bourbon. So nothing's going to waste there. As we've already pointed out through the flavour notes that were said, we are juicy apricots, peach, fresh apples. It's those really light, refreshing tropical notes that are coming through. So I'm sure you're very much aware of the overall process of making whiskey. Of course, there's 6 processes to making whiskey, which is malting, mashing, fermentation, distillation, maturation, and then blending. Of course, consumption can come in at the end there as the last one as well. But every distillery, of course, has their own little unique way that they use to make their spirit taste unique to the rest. So I'm not going to, I will skip over this quite quickly, but this is the Livet Valley. That is the Pack Horse Bridge. It was actually discovered in the late 1700s, so they don't know exactly who built it. But it's believed that George Smith used it to escape the Livet Valley and meet with smugglers when smuggling his spirit, because it was only about a half mile away from his farm that he was illicitly distilling in. We don't use the water to actually make the Glenlivet spirit, but we do use the river water to cool down the machinery to this day during the production process. This is Byers Farm. It's about 20 miles outside of the Glenlivet distillery. We work with a distillery, a grain group called the Banff and Murray Grain Group. And that's allowing us to pull in all of the barley that we use to produce 21.5 million litres of spirit every year. We're pulling in from 60 miles outside of the distillery. So it's all very locally sourced. We're not bringing anything in from Europe or further afield. When you're working in Speyside with 51 rival distilleries in that area, some of them being huge names in the industry, it's very impressive for the Glenlivet as a brand to be able to pull in all of what we need to produce our whiskey from such a local area around the distillery itself. This is Josie's Well. It is one of 16 wells that are located around the distillery. The distillery is actually sitting in the centre of what is like a naturally formed basin at the head of the Livet Valley, and all of the water gathers at where the distillery sits. Around that basin, there are 16 of these old volcanic wells. Once the rainwater falls on this land, it goes through about 21 years of travelling through the rock beneath the ground. It's volcanic rock, it picks up the minerals and naturally cleans out the water, and it's from these wells that we then pull in the water to produce our whiskey. We produce two mashing processes. We have two mash tuns. Each mash tun takes about 100,000 litres of water from these wells every 6 hours to create 60,000 litres of wash beer, which will then go on to distillation and then into maturation as well. Now, nobody knows who Josie is. This was named in the time of George Smith, so she was somebody who was around at that time and probably very important to George himself, but wasn't Mrs. Smith, so nobody knows who Josie was, but she got a well named after her to this day. This is, of course, the picture that's right behind me, but this is E1. This distillery was built in 2010. It is one of three still houses. One was made in 1859, one was made in 2010, and one was made in 2021. We have a total of 22 stills across the entire Glenlivet distillery. When I said them produce 60,000 litres of wash beer, those 60,000 litres will be divided 20, 20, and 20 down the stills on the right-hand side. And then by the time we go through first distillation, they'll be divided 8,000, 8,000, and 8,000 down the stills on the left for second distillation. On the left-hand side of the image, though, you will see that copper pipe that's lying horizontally behind the stills. This is called TVR, thermal vapor recompression. It was used by oil rigs for many, many years, and we at the Glenlivet realised that we could actually use it to trap the water vapour during distillation, redirect it to the bottom of the still, and by using this, we've reduced the energy consumption of distillation by about 65%. And then we invited all of our competition from in the Scotch whisky industry to the Glenlivet to observe this, and it's now been rolled out across the entire industry. Loads of other of our distilleries and competitor distilleries are starting to use this FDR. And then from there, we have 150 proof, as I mentioned earlier on, light, refreshing spirit, which will go into a combination of either ex-bourbon barrels, Quercus alba, given us the light, refreshing coconut, lemon zest, mango, pineapple flavours, or it will go into Quercus robur, European red oak, which is cinnamon, nutmeg, brown sugar, warm, spicy flavours like that. Will come from our sherry casks. And then a very small percentage, of course, will go into cognac or virgin French oak or fusion barrels as well. Here's just a wider shot of the Glenlivet. You'll see those two large smokestacks, those chimneys. They're actually coming out of an anaerobic digester where we take all of the grains and husks of the barley grain that we produce. We go through 27 tons of barley grists and husks every 6 hours. We then turn that 27 tons through this anaerobic digester into biofuel, which we use to actually power all of the trucks that we transport our whiskey in barrels across Speyside with. So we're actually creating energy to transport our whiskey through the process of making whiskey itself. And here's just a couple of the people who are involved in the process. The people who make our stills are from a group called Forsyths. They're about 20 miles away from the distillery. There's only two cooperages that make casks in Scotland, one on the west coast and one in Speyside. That's very close by to the distillery as well. And of course, you have our warehousing team who look after our 4.6 million casks of Glenlivet whisky, which are maturing at any one time in a site called Mulben. And finally, we have the Glenlivet 18. Not finally, sorry, we've got a 21 after this. But we've got the Glenlivet 18. The Glenlivet 18 is the most award-winning whiskey that the Glenlivet has ever produced. And unlike every other bottle that we've that we've had so far, our blending team, when they're making the 12, the 14, the 15, the fusion cask, every time they make a batch of that, they ensure it tastes exactly the same. We want, if you enjoy the 14 today and then you go out and buy it in 5 years' time, we want it to taste exactly the same. You will see on the label of the Glenlivet 18, it says batch reserve. And that allows the blending team to be far more flexible, and they can use different barrels from around the warehouses. They will follow roughly the same recipe, but once they've done the blend, if they have a cask lying there that allows them to improve upon that flavour profile, they're not stuck to the same consistency standards as they are with the rest. They allow themselves to make that change. So the Glenlivet 18 was originally blended in 1995, and for 30 years it's had a constant evolution of flavour to what we have today. And that's what's allowed it to win so many awards, is because we've continually been improving upon this flavour over many, many years. You'll get kind of chocolate covered oranges, you get cinnamon, you do get dried fruit on the kind of hidden in the background. You're still getting that vanilla, that kind of tropical note, but we're definitely pulling in more of the kind of dessert, wintry, spicy flavours that are coming through.
How many awards have you won over the last 5 years on the 18?
Well, that's a very good question. We have won. I wouldn't be able to say exactly. We in the last 5 years we have won double gold 3 times at the San Francisco International Wine and Spirit Championships, which is the biggest one that I know of. But we have.
You're ruining what I was trying to get you to tee me up for. I was hoping you're going to be like, we've won less this last 5 years than the year. You dropped the proof on it. You went from 43% to 40 5 years ago. Why?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I see what you were lining up there. Yeah, no, they did. They dropped the proof on it again. That's just that was one match to the next. Uh, I don't have an exact reason for why the blending team decided to do that. It
I
was
think it was more just everything else was 40, so they put it in line with the 18. But
yeah, it
it
was
was such a
one.
it was such a sad moment to see it go from 43 to 46. Those 3% added a lot of texture to it.
Yeah, like and that was when they changed to this bottle as well, of course, from the old design that had like almost a tea stained 18-year-old label on the bottle. But yeah, they did lowered the ABV, which I'm assuming was just a blending choice. And as I say, the batch reserve allows them to be a bit more flexible. So in the future, it may rise. They may put it up again if they believe it would be the best thing for the flavor profile. But it's a very good point, actually. That is actually probably one of the biggest changes that they've had from batch to batch. Like, if you were to try one batch next, I always say if you were to try like this batch to the previous, you probably wouldn't taste a difference. But if you tasted this batch to one that was made 10 years ago, you'd absolutely would. And with of course, I would every time I've said that, I've forgotten about the fact that 5 years ago we changed the ABV. So that's a big factor on how that flavor profile would change as well. But this, of course, there's nothing fancy with this one, with like a finish. There's nothing, no experimentation. This is the classic way of making a Scotch whisky. It's double oak maturation. We are using more sherry than we were on the 12, but we're still at a majority of bourbon. So you're still getting very, very smooth, round, buttery texture to the whiskey. You are getting some of that warm spice and brown sugar notes from the sherry, but you still get kind of as I mentioned, the chocolate covered oranges, these kind of more dessert flavors that are coming through. And what you'll find is that when you drink it and you swallow the whiskey, after about 10 seconds, it takes on this kind of bitter cacao flavor, kind of bitter dark chocolate finish that lingers around for a very, very long time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, the last one I'm noticing there that I missed out on is the hint of oak and spice. At this point, once you're at 18 years of maturation or anything older, it's almost impossible to avoid not getting some of those sort of tannins, spicy aromas coming through in those older aged spirits. So you are now starting to get some of that warm, spicy oak flavour coming through as well.
You're right. I was talking smack. It felt a little light on the mid palate for me, but then the finish just keeps going and going. It's just creamy and spicy. It just still there. It's
Yeah,
impressive for
even once you think it's completely gone, like
yeah.
it almost comes in waves as well. Like the flavor like returns again, and it
Yeah.
changes over minutes of after you've swallowed it. You can still get a very light taste of the finish that lasts for a very long time. I do think that orange flavor lingers in the finish as well. It lasts for a long time. And you get this kind of toffee sweet, and then, as I say, finally towards the end, you start getting that bitter dark chocolate flavor as well. So I put in this next slide just because Vadim had told me that you have a good knowledge around whiskey as an ex distiller, as someone who's worked in the industry for several years. Uh, I do have quite a lot of trainings with bartenders, with different people around the country. I'm always interested and happy to answer any questions, particularly any questions that might keep me on my toes and make me pull information that I've not had to use in a while. So if anyone has any questions regarding the Glenlivet or Scotch whisky in general, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people have. And yeah, even if it's one of our other brands outside of Glenlivet, I'm more than happy to answer if anyone has any questions. Was there any that appeared in the chat or while I was talking there?
Is the Nodora, that one's all gone? That was just a short run?
So the Nudura was released as similar to the 18. It was released in batches. It translates into the original, and it was 100% ex bourbon barrels that were being used for Nudura. It was released in batches. It was never officially stated that they were ending the Nudura's run, but they haven't released one since 2019. I think the last batch of it was released. The rarest Nudura that they've ever released was the one that was finished in uh, whiskey that peated whiskey barrels. So a barrel that had been used on a West Coast peated whiskey was then used to mature the Nudura. That's probably the most sought after one, but as I say, they never officially said they were stopping the run, so they could very well come out and release a new Nudura any day. But for the time being, it's not been in production for quite a few years.
Yeah. Glad I got a couple bottles.
Yeah, you should hold on to them. They're a bit of a collector's item at this point, I feel like.
Yeah, ChatGPT said Nadura peated cask came out to the US in 23 and 24. I've never actually seen one. Do you guys talk about where you got the peated casks from?
So again, because we don't own a peated distillery.
Yeah, I was gonna
Out of
say,
our
you guys
13
don't know.
yeah, out of our 13, we have 11 in Speyside, one on Orkney, and one in Glasgow. The only one that we do have that's peated is called Altavania, and it does 6 months of the year peated and 6 months of the year unpeated, and it's right in the middle of Speyside, which is quite a unique whiskey. My favourite whiskey of all time is a 25-year-old peated Caperdonic, which was the same sort of philosophy, but it closed down in 2002 and it was knocked down in 2013. But that was one of our distilleries, and we still have some of the casks in the warehouses. But that's still available in the market, the Caperdonic 25, and that's a East Coast peat box, this is like where you get into like crazy depth of detail about whiskey, but East Coast peat bogs and West Coast peat bogs have different flavour influences. And rather than having like the bonfire, like freshly put out match kind of smoke like the Islay whiskies have, it's almost like this sweet barbecue smoke that comes from East Coast peat bogs. Not very frequently used. As I say, Altavania do 6 months of the year. Caperdonic used to do the same, but then they closed down. But then our marketing team came up with the best tagline for any whiskey ever, which was peated or unpeated, but never to be repeated. Or
Ah,
that writes itself.
that's good.
But that was I don't believe it's Altavania that we used for the Endura though. I think it was a competitor whiskey that they keep quite closely guarded to their chest. But because
Altavania, I've got my first bottle of it. I didn't know they had peated and unpeated. How would one tell them apart? Is there another brand that they make for the peated?
I don't believe the peated and unpeated versions have arrived in the US. Altavania was closed for about 5 years under renovations in the distillery, and it only kicked back into production about 6 or 7 months ago, just before I left
Oh no,
Scotland.
mine is a 22-year-old independently bottled bottle. It's not an
Oh,
OE.
okay. So I'm assuming on the label, if it's an independently bottled one, they would probably. I'm assuming they would state if it doesn't state anything, it's probably unpeated. But if it was peated, like I almost
I
guarantee
would
you.
hope so, yeah. But there's no other name. Like, like Lichig has Tobermory, right? Like they're like distilleries that do peated and unpeated will oftentimes have another name for their offshoot.
No, so it just states on the label. Either it's just Altavania or it's Altavania and it says peated under its age statement as well.
Very cool.
It'll have the age statement and then it just has peated on the label, but it still goes under the Altavania name.
And then the Nadura peated cask is the only peated tasting Glenlivet ever released, or have you played around with
Uh,
using peated malt?
within the last couple of years, yes, but historically, the water source that we use that's going through those mountains and through the volcanic rock, there are peat bogs there, and historically we had like a very very small like parts per million measure of peat, but it was there. In recent expressions, that's completely been nullified out, and we don't have any peat in the bottles. But if you find a Glenlivet bottle from like the 70s or 80s on like an auction site, it will have a small amount of peat in there, which we unfortunately we no longer have. But historically, there was a small amount of peat within the Glenlivet whiskey. In fact, if you go even further back, our distillery, Longmorn, is extremely important to the whiskey industry because the man who founded it was called John Duff. And Longmorn is actually where John Duff started his distillery. He also trained Nakataka Sakitsuru, who then went off to Japan and started the Japanese whiskey industry. He trained at Longmorn, but he was the first man to build a train station at his distillery to start shipping barrels of whiskey from Speyside down to Edinburgh. And then very quickly, they started bringing coal up to Speyside. So before he built the train station, loads of Speyside whiskies were actually using peat, and we had this like sweet bonfire smoke until like 1870s, and then the coal started coming up, and like the how we recognise Speyside today. Oh yeah, there's a classic Nadura bottle being shown there. Is that a peated one or is that just a a classic?
That's the peated Nadora. It
Ah,
all says, bottled and released in small batches, no chill filtration, finished in heavily peated whiskey cask, bottled at cask strength, which
yeah.
is 61.5.
So our master blender, Sandy Islop, when he drinks whiskey all the time, he will add enough water to make it 50-50. So if it's 40% ABV, he'll actually water it down to 20%. The Nadura is the only whiskey that he adds no water to, and he just drinks it as is. Like he just believes the flavour of that one's it's already perfect at like 60 odd percent or 59% or wherever the batch is.
Yeah, this is batch PW 1015.
Okay. So like, that would be that. That's probably one of the more recent batches as well. That would have been in the last couple of productions of it.
It says bottled 1015.
2015. Okay, that's
Says
actually earlier than
10/15.
yeah. That would have been October 2015.
Yeah, yeah,
So
It
that's
might have been
actually
October
earlier.
15th, whatever year you guess.
That's earlier than I would have thought for the batch that you said. I thought I was a much later batch, but 2015 is earlier than I assumed it would have been. But I know we have one last whiskey to try as well, which is our Glenlivet 21. The Glenlivet 21 is quite unique. I'm just going to throw up this presentation again. Oh, here we go. So the Glenlivet 21 is quite unique because this was after the Glenlivet 15. As I mentioned, the Glenlivet 15 was the first finish that we made as a distillery at the Glenlivet. Everybody was like 8-year old, 10-year old, 14-year old, being kind of the oldest whiskey that people were finishing. And our 15 sort of fell in line with that. It was in that area of aged whiskies that people were using. We created the sample room because nobody was really experimenting with how highly aged older spirits would interact with the idea of cask finishing. And no better expression kind of shows that off than the 21 because we didn't just pick one type of cask to finish this in. We done 21 years in ex bourbon and Oloroso sherry. We blended that together and left it for a year in a large vat to so the oil could all balance out. And then we divided that 21-year-old whiskey in three, and we put 1/3 of it in a port pipe cask, 1/3 of it in Troncase cognac casks, and 1/3 of it in PX Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. So you have five different industries. Each industry is equally as complex as Scotch whisky is on its own, and we're able to take these barrels from all these corners of the world, bring them into Scotland, and have all the amount of time it takes to produce bourbon, sherry, cognac, Scotch whisky, the amount of time and effort and craft that goes into building these flavors to be able to pull all of that into one singular bottle. This is a truly special whiskey, and it's one that every single time you take a sip, you will taste something completely different. Oloroso sherry still bringing in that spice. It's the cinnamon, it's the nutmeg, it's the dried fruit. The bourbon highlights that tropical spirit that was there in the background. It's still present. It's the vanilla, it's the coconut notes that you're going to taste. The PX sherry is that sharp, sweet, burnt sugar caramel flavour that's coming through. The cognac gives a kind of dry nuttiness to the overall flavour. And I find that the port, it's hard to pin down where the port's flavour profile is coming through, but it definitely adds this kind of more round, robust texture to the overall flavour, the texture of the whiskey itself. So it's one of these whiskies that every single time you take a sip, you'll taste something completely different. It's definitely one that you keep at the back of the cupboard, and you can enjoy the 14, the 15 with your friends, and then once they've all went home after dinner, you can crack this one out as the one to keep for hidden at the back of the cupboard for those special occasions. But I find with whiskies like this that I keep them for special occasions, and then the occasion never is special enough, and I always save it for longer and longer, and then the bottle's sitting there for a long time, and they end up cracking it on a random night where you're just wanting to try something new.
I the last time I drank this was maybe 4 years ago, and I don't remember it being this good. Oh my God. Has it changed over the years, or has it always consistently been this amazing?
So it hasn't. It's batched as well. We find that the fact that we are using three different finishes, sometimes the blending team they try their best to maintain consistency over it. But we're dealing with so many different casks that are pulling in different flavor profiles that they release it as batches because they know there could be changes out with our control. But for the most part, it should taste. It should be the same roughly coming through in flavor. But it's true. It's one of my favorites for sure. Anytime I find a bar that's selling this, I'll definitely crack one of these open. And amazingly, I found, I don't know if anyone in the call is in the Dallas area, but there's a bar in Dallas that I found 3 weeks ago that sells a measure of this for $20 in their bar, which was an absolute steal. So I spent way too long at that bar, but that was one of the best bars I've found in the US so far.
We're gonna need a Google drop to that bar.
Yeah,
Jason just in oh no, he was in Denver. He wasn't in Dallas. Whatever. It's worth the trip. 20 bucks a pour all day long.
if you're ever in Dallas, it's called the Old Monk,
Old
and it
month.
sells
Thank you.
I think they make their money on beer, but they have a lot of very special whiskies that they kind of sell at cost, so people can try whiskies that they might not have been able to try before. It's definitely a bar that's worth. If you are in the area, it's worth checking out. You can get one of these, I'd say, for an absolute steal of $20.
Fantastic.
Okay.
What were you saying, Tony?
Sorry, I was talking to my cat.
Yeah,
That's
but
important.
was the cat talking back?
Not yet.
Okay, good. You haven't had enough whiskey. That's good. Hey, are we gonna take a photo?
Oh yeah, let's do it. Yeah. I think this is our nearly our last pouring. I didn't want to interrupt the presentation. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I can stop the share for if you're.
for just a second, we have a tradition here.
Yeah.
We want to say thank you so much for you being here, and thank you to everyone who made tonight. I know it's a summer night, and it's June. There's a lot of places you could be, but we appreciate you spending the evening with us. So cheers to you. Raise a glass, and then spend 5 seconds just straight up smiling to the camera because I'm going to take a screen grab. There we go. I'm dragging my feet. Mark's going to join us. Come on, Mark. Come on back. And I'm giving Michael a chance to pour himself something special. Mm. Mm. All right, smile, everyone. Got it. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, the last time I had the 21 year was when we moved and bought the house. And as we moved, we had way too many boxes, and I killed this bottle as a celebration. I don't remember it being this good.
That's
It's
a
way
good.
better
That's a
now.
good celebration. Celebratory bottle to crack open for sure.
Yep.
No, when I was in Scotland, I had a wooden shelf of whiskey that just as I was leaving, it started to bend. So I had to like move all that into a storage unit, which killing a 21-year-old bottle is definitely a better solution to the problem of needing to move these bottles. But it's been a pleasure hosting this. I'm glad you've enjoyed all the whiskies. I was just in the chat if there is a if people want to put in what their favourite whiskey that they had
Oh
throughout
yeah.
throughout
I'm
the tasting. That'd
sorry.
be
I'm so much enjoying this that I'm not doing my job today. This is why Jane's taking over. Give me 2 seconds. We ask questions while Vadim updates the poll. It'll 2 seconds.
So I I find that there's a dramatic difference between the 18 and the 21 in terms of smoothness. I expected the 18 to be smoother than it was,
okay.
but
And
it
the 21's a big step up in the smoothness you're finding.
yeah, yeah, and I'm surprised that the 18 has a harshness to it. I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but um there's a bit of a harshness to it, and I was a little surprised. The 21, you know,
I
a
think
lot
that
smoother.
absolutely could come through from the 18 years. There's definitely more of the kind of oak spice and the tannins that are coming through in the 18. And because we're using more, not only in the maturation, but in the finishes, we're using more Quercus robur, the European red oak. The European red oak naturally gives more oil than American white oak. So it creates that divide between your taste buds and the tannins and the alcohol. So I do wonder if that's what's creating that like quite stark difference between the textures between the 18 and the 21. It might just be the use of the sherry casks in this. Like it's because it's a softer wood, so the barrels are actually breathing. They get bigger during the day, they get smaller during the night, and
Mhm.
because the Quercus robur is more porous and softer, it allows for more movement, more transaction. We get more color, we get more flavor, more oil, but we lose more. We lose about 3% a year in a sherry cask. Well, we lose about 1.5% in an American oak barrel. So it's a balance for sure. You get more flavor, but you get less whiskey.
So the 18 year is using European oak. Is that what you said?
So it's using both ex-bourbon and European oak, but Oloroso sherry. But the 21 is using Oloroso sherry, PX sherry, port, which are all kind of like that Spanish red oak. And
Yes.
then it does also have the cognac cask as well. So if you like remember the texture that was given to the 14 compared to the 15, that kind of thick viscosity, that texture that was brought in the 14 it's been given to the 21 as well through the
Yeah.
cognac finish.
Yeah.
That 21 was really special. I mean, that was an extraordinary pour for sure.
Yeah.
I hate how much I really like it.
I think sublime is a good word to describe it.
Yeah.
Sublime. That's
It
I
had
mean,
the texture, it had everything, and it was perfect at 43. Like I didn't think it was thin. I didn't think it, a lot of times you feel like you're getting a higher tier and you're not getting enough. You're getting too much water for your buck. This was
yeah.
just all around fantastic.
So, interestingly, that's the 21. The step up to 25, which is also in the sample room, it does the same finishes, but it removes the port, which adds a lot of that kind of round, robust flavour that comes through in the 21. So it's an interesting decision that the blending team made. But that's personally, I actually prefer the 21. I think it's a more interesting dram because it has this extra layer. And yeah, it's just like I've had it a good number of times, and every time I have it, I feel like I pick up on another flavour profile. I pick up on something different I never tasted the last time. It's something you can always go back to, and it'll never become boring. It's a yeah, it's a sublime whiskey if I steal that word.
I did want to say that as we went through these whiskeys, each one I liked more and more. But if I'm taking cost into consideration, my favorite was the 14.
The fourth, yeah, as I say, it's a brand
There.
new whiskey for me since I've been in the US, but it's
Yeah.
very quickly growing on me.
Yeah. The 14 and the 15 for the price point, you know, to me, a better, uh, more economic bang for the buck compared to the 21. But, 21,
So
I'm
I
saving
hands
pennies for the
down.
21 now.
Yeah.
think
21, like price wise, is essentially double the 18, but it also the quality is there. For me, it was a huge quality jump flavor wise between the 18 and the 21. They're very different.
yeah, it's a big.
21 is definitely going to be a enjoy at the bar on the company dime kind of dram.
Yeah, that's how I find
Heard.
it. That's how I enjoy it most.
Can are we done? Oh, you're gonna give us the results, right, Vadim?
I am, yeah. So
Okay,
everybody
but I
voted
want
as
to
well?
be. I just want to say before Owen leaves, I have something to tell him, but it's outside the scope, so we have to stop recording.
It's off
Okay,
the
so
record. Got it.
yeah.
Okay. All right, Owen, what do you think was the group's favorite out of what we tasted so far?
Well, are we? In the poll answers, do you think are we taking in price or are we going purely by flavor? Do you
It
think?
says, what was your favorite whiskey of the night? It's however people took it. Usually it's just whatever your favorite.
Yeah,
But
I'm going to say I think 21 might have won
all
just
right,
off of the conversations that we've just had there. I think 21 might take the lead.
fair enough. So you're absolutely right. Took the lead, but didn't take the show. It's 21 took first place, but 14 took second place. Pretty close.
14's close behind, and then Fusion got some votes as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's usually what happens, right? There's nothing wrong with the 12, but once you move on past it, it's
yeah.
going to be a high ball maker. Like you're not
Well,
going back.
I also find from our branding point of view, I find that the Glenlivet almost is on a double-edged sword on the fact that it's the 12-year-old is the number one Scotch whisky in the US and has been for like 60 years almost at this point. So everyone thinks that's only in the US, but I think a lot of people view the Glenlivet as like the baseline whiskey, and then all other brands are building on what the Glenlivet is because of the Glenlivet 12. But once you take one step beyond the 12 and you end up on the 14 and the 15, there's so much that the brand offers. And we are the largest single malt distillery in Scotland now. We overtook Glenfiddich, about 2 years ago. And the amount of spirit we're producing is allowing us to be experimental and innovate with these new casks, and we've got the liquid there that can release batch things like fusion cask. Like no one knew how that was going to turn out, whether or not it was going to work out well, and it creates just an amazing use of this whiskey. And I think Yeah, the Glenlivet 12 is a fantastic flavour. It earned its spot as being number one, but once you take one step beyond that in the Glenlivet portfolio, there's so much it has to offer.
Yeah,
Uh, there's,
we did an optional add-on of an independently bottled Glenlivet in 100% sherry cask. It looks like you guys have a good relationship with Signatory because I think, I don't know if I've seen Glenlivet bottled in other independently bottled.
Signatory and Berry Bros and Rudd are the two main ones that the Glenlivet will work with. We do work with most, but those are the ones that we have like long-standing relationships.
Gotcha.
Oh, at the pot still in Glasgow as well. That's if anyone ever does visit Glasgow, the pot still is probably the most impressive collection of whiskies I've ever seen in one, or Scotch whiskies to be very exact, that I've ever seen in one place. But it's a dream bar by my account.
I had the most amazing what's the unpeated version of Springbank? Is that's not the long road, it's the other one. At the pot still, the bartender recommended a cage bottling he picked up himself and was selling for like 10 pounds a pour. It was like ridiculously cheap. He's like, yeah, I paid 50 for it, like whatever.
Yeah, and he was right, and you got to try it. It was out of his personal collection.
It was fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. No, I love the guys there. You've always got something interesting to try as well.
Awesome.
How is that? So Jane posted Remedy has a 16-year. Um, where'd you put it?
I'll put it in the
16-year
chat real
first
quick.
fill
It's a
sherry.
signatory 16-year first fill sherry butt cask.
Yeah. How do you know? What is that like? Do you know, Owen?
It would probably be similar to what we're going to taste the 17 year, but probably maybe Owen knows a little. I sent the link in the chat.
Cask strength. Six
Yeah, this
years
will be it'll
cask
be
strength.
interesting. So, being first fill sherry, but it's like there's a with the ex bourbon American oak, we find it works really, really well with the Glenlivet spirit because it's already got that kind of lemon zest, that pineapple, and the American white oak casks just work really well with it. When we make ones that are 100% sherry matured Glenlivet, it's like it takes on almost like a two-tone flavor thing. You can still taste that background of the light, refreshing flavors, but you're going to get far more of the wintry spice, and you get more of that, like strange flavor profiles of like fresh fruit. But I guess the best way I could probably describe it is the close to the 14, and the fact that it takes on more of that dessert fruit, is chocolate covered fresh fruits that you start picking up on. And the kind of the one I've never tried this from Signatory. My best call for reference is that so the US is the number one market in the world for Glenlivet. Uh, would anyone like to take a guess at where number two is?
France?
France is number one for Aberlour, but it's not number two for Glenlivet. We actually make the
Japan.
cask in Glenlivet 14 for the US. Did you say Japan?
Yeah.
We're actually like you're so close that I will give you it, but it's Taiwan.
Taiwan.
The
Okay.
second
Wow.
largest market in the world for you for the
Wow.
Glenlivet, and they have a 13, a 14, and a 15-year-old 100% sherry matured Glenlivet. Like they have the three only place in the world you can get it. I've not travelled out to Taiwan yet, but I managed to tick off Glenlivet 14 cognac and fusion cask this year. One day I'll get out there and I'll try the Glenlivet sherry casks from the from.
It's funny. Somebody mentioned early on that it tastes, I think it was the 14, tasted like Kavalan.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Taiwan makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
yeah. For it to come, yeah, Cavalan's an incredible whiskey as well. So that's yeah, like I'm willing to bet that this the sherry, the first fill sherry butt that you try. You said it was a 17-year-old. Will
16.
probably will probably align with that kind of Cavalan flavor profile as well.
Wow.
But it's just a huge sherry market in Taiwan. Like everything has to be
Yeah.
sherry matured. All has to be like your Macallans, your Aberlours, your Glenlivet. So we made these specific bottles for Taiwan. They're 100% sherry matured. Like a 15-year-old whiskey that, like, if you put your phone torch to the bottle, the light doesn't pass through it. It's that the liquid's that dark.
We need friends in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Actually, the first cognac cask that I tried was 13-year-old, exclusive to Taiwan market.
It's a huge cognac market as well. I think there's a lot of cognac houses that make. There's actually some cognac houses that only they don't operate in any other markets outside of Taiwan.
No, I mean the Glenlivet, the one that's 14 here, that was first released as a 13-year-old from the Taiwanese market
Oh, right, and you tried it there first.
11 years ago. Yeah.
No, amazing.
I'm
Yeah, so,
putting in the chat. We bought a 17-year-old, or I bought a bottle of signatory 17-year-old fully sherry cast, and a lot of the pretty much everyone that signed up today has a sample of it. So we can share some notes, and I would assume the 17 would be very similar to the 16.
is that from Remedy?
This one was a K&L pick from K&L Wine and Spirits in Hollywood. This year they did away with their they used to have you build up points throughout the year and you get into this raffle system. This is the one year they finally got rid of it. Well, they got rid of it last year, and I'm spending more money with them than ever.
Yeah, you'd be racking up the tickets if that was still running.
Yep.
Well, it was a pleasure to host this. I'm going to leave you guys to enjoy this first fill bourbon. I'm just realizing here in New York it's now past 12 o'clock at night, and my walls are thin. So to oblige my neighbours, I'm gonna leave you guys here. But please enjoy this whiskey, and as we say
So,
in Scotland, Slanjava.
so wait, before you
Thank
go,
you.
I had one thing I wanted to say. Vadim, is it okay if you cut off the
Yeah, yeah, 1 second. So we're just gonna say
recording?
goodbye. Thank you, Owen. Thank you so much.
Thank
Stick
you,
around for
Owen.
just a quick thing at the end, and we'll let you go. Cheers.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.